Hello. Hi. So you lived in Joburg for a bit, hey?
Yeah.
That side. What were you doing there? What were you doing that side?
Oh no, I live in Randburg.
So every time when we take these tours, we always make sure that we involve ourselves to the community. So right behind us, this is where we get our typical township breakfast, which is mostly fat cakes and acha. Sanibonani, Minjani. Hayi nasiyaphila. Ekuseni mkhosi. Mthatha kanjani? Angisawazi man. Great. Hayi, sweet. Sanibona, mama, kanjani? Mehlo madala man. Kanje singa. Hey.
Oh, Zaina Asisi. Ulushele wafangamini. Obatashisa. Wakenya mo friji. Yausuye. Karabo.
Okay, right here we have fat cakes, which is deep fried dough with some acha. Acha is pickled mango with palm oil and a bit of spice. This is a typical township breakfast. You can have it in the morning, you can have it in the afternoon, but normally here in the township, this is what we have in the morning. So just to demonstrate on how we eat them, so we make something like a sandwich, you know. You can always eat it with anything, but preferably acha is the best. So you just add your acha. It's a bit hot, and then you close it, and then you have your snack. Enjoy.
Really hot. Just come out the
Just came from the stove.
I'm not a big fan of spice, so I'm gonna have mine as is.
The only way to cool it down, you need to open it. Mnandi acha vandag joh.
market you're gonna open?
I'm not sure. I'd be lying. Welcome to Hector Pietersen Memorial site, which is also accompanied by the museum on the other side. I'd like to quote a few words from Steve Biko's book, I Write What I Like. He says, the most potent weapon of the oppressor is the minds of the oppressed. In 1976, on the 13th of June, the school kids of Orlando West said enough, it's enough. Change was needed. School leaders organized each other. They went to Orlando East, to Communal Hall, and held a meeting. And on the meeting, it was decided that on the 16th of June, they're going to have a peaceful protest against the use of Afrikaans as the medium of instruction in schools. Came the 16th of June, they gathered each other from the deeper parts of Soweto. Over 10,000 school kids with placards, some with their fists up, singing the national anthem, which is Nkosi Sikelel. And now as they would march towards this direction, they planned to go to Orlando Stadium to have a political meeting. And after the political meeting, they would go to Orlando Police Station and hand over their memorandum. Unfortunately, when they got to these parts, they were approached by a group of armed police officers, which is represented by the pillars on this direction. And when they saw that, they quickly deflected to the right, heading towards Moema Street. And right where Moema Street and Vilakazi intersect, there was another group of armed police officers, not only with guns, they even had dogs. Trying to disperse the crowd, dogs would be unleashed. The only weapon school kids had against stand guns, rifles, were the rocks and the stones in the street. Unfortunately, the dogs were stoned to death, and that would be followed by tear gas canisters. Of course, we had those who were very brave. They would cover their noses and grab the canister, throwing it back to the sender. And that would definitely get the police officers very, very angry. And suddenly, random bullets were unleashed, live bullets were unleashed to the innocent school kids. The first victim was only 15 years old by the name of Hastings Ndlovu. The second victim is the youngest of all, whom the memorial site along with the museum are named after, by the name of Zolile Hector Pietersen. That picture right there, it was captured by a gentleman known as Sam Zimmer. It made international news. So understanding that the rest of the world never really understood what was happening in South Africa, they were mostly fed propaganda. Now, when the photo came out, people didn't want to get their hands dirty. People didn't want to associate themselves with a country that kills kids. 2 years, South Africa was in sanctions. It didn't only happen on the 16th of June. It continued 2 more days, when now people like the gentleman who's holding the young Hector Pietersen would be hunted. Those whom they thought were the organizers of the protest, they were wanted. Some fled the country, some were captured. Taken to what is known today as Johannesburg Police Station. On the 16th floor, they would be kept there. And then later when parents would ask about their kids. They would be told that your kids were violent and suicidal. So they jumped from the 16th floor all the way to the ground. And later we find out that they didn't jump, but they were pushed. We have these walls which stand in different height with spaces in between. The different height would be the different age groups, from as young as 12 years to as old as 18. The spaces in between would be the missing people and the missing information. Like what happened to Mbuyiso Makubu, the gentleman holding Hector Pietersen. Ever since the release of the photo, he had to run for his life. And then in the late 1990s, his parents received a letter saying that he's alive. He got scholarship in Nigeria and he was okay. Ever since that day till today, no any other form of communication. The big question I asked myself, did he really write the letter? We have these trees. As we'd know that a branch of an olive tree is a gesture for peace. These were suggested by our former late president, Nelson Mandela. The first tree on my far right will be planted by him. The next tree would be planted by a former US President, Bill Clinton. The third tree planted by our Archbishop, Desmond Tutu. The rest of the trees would be planted by respective leaders of this community. We have this line which points at the door of the museum and points at the olive trees on the other side of the road. And the olive trees would lead us to the exact spot where the events took place. The stones and the rocks would represent the only weapon the people had against live bullets. Our parents were known as klepgooiers, stone throwers. And yes, of course, that would be their weapon. So the water right there, it is meant to wash away the sins of 1976 so that we don't get to repeat the same mistakes. As it flows, it goes down. It is meant to represent the tears of the parents and the school kids. As it goes down, it reaches small streams that represent the bloodshed. Today, the 16th of June, it is celebrated as Youth Day, where we dress our school uniform and we celebrate and commemorate the lives of those brave school kids who stood in the forefront of the regime and made today what it is. And yes, of course, as time would go by, even syllabuses would change in school. Quite frankly, what hasn't changed is the number of kids each classroom accommodates. Each classroom would have more than 40 school kids, probably 5 rows. And yes, of course, in a crowded class, there's a lot of distraction and it's not easy for one to focus, as our passing rate will always fluctuate. It's because of such things. So now we will move to Nelson Mandela's house and we share a bit about Nelson, and then we travel back to Label Soweto Backpackers, where we will have our traditional stop. If you guys have any questions, it's a good time to ask them. The red painting on the street, it is meant to represent the blood of the school kids. And the shoes on my right on the wall, they are meant to represent the aftermath.
Yeah. And right here on our left, it's a wire expression of school kids on the other side with placards and their fists up. And we have the police officer on the right with a dog. And then when you cross the street at the corner, there's one single olive tree which is standing by itself, which marks the exact spot where the young Hector Pietersen would be shot and killed. And right behind it, it is the famous Orlando West High School, which is where the first boycotts would take place. And then we take a left, entering Vilakazi Street, the only street in the world with 2 Nobel Peace Prize winners. We're speaking about the late Nelson Mandela and Ubaba Desmond Tutu. Right this side, it is the house of our former late Nelson Mandela. Of course, he was not born here. He only got to move in the house in 1946. In 1990, on the 11th of February, he would be released from prison, coming back to his house, but only spending 11 days. Because of too much paparazzi, he had to be moved to a much more secure location, to a house right over the hill on my right-hand side. Today, the house is a museum. And yes, of course, these bars that demarcate the house, they would represent imprisonment. Now, one very special thing is this tree. It's an Australian tree, Melaleuca. It is special to the family as the umbilical cords of the grandchildren and the children would be buried underneath the tree. So it is African tradition to bury the umbilical cord as introduction to the ancestors, to make sure that you are given light and protection. If we would look closer to the house, we see underneath the roof there's a bit of black bricks, and that would be from petrol bombing. So when Nelson Mandela was in prison, Mama Winnie Mandela was in the house. And yes, of course, because all political leaders were in prison, she was the one who was keeping the fire burning on the ground. Hi, Mama. And yes, of course, at some point, the house would be shot at. It got so far that she would even build a wall right behind the window to protect herself. So right now we can just move to the front, right where the 8115 famous address is. And this, of course, just after that, we come back to our rides and we head back to the backpackers. Nivule nini, mama? Ah, ayinamapoza. Now call this side the Disneylands of Soweto. Now when it's quiet like this, it's not good. So this is where the locals really come and have fun. Mostly Fridays, Saturdays and Sundays. A lot of events take place here. And yes, of course, it gets really, really packed. We good. Right this side, it is the house of our former late Nelson Mandela. Of course, he was not born here. He only got to move in the house in 1946. In 1990, on the 11th of February, he would be released from prison, coming back to his house, but only spending 11 days. Because of too much paparazzi, he had to be moved to a much more secure location, to a house right over the hill on my right-hand side. Today the house is a museum. And yes, of course, these bars that demarcate the house, they would represent imprisonment. Now, one very special thing is this tree. It's an Australian tree, Melaleuca. It is special to the family as the umbilical cords of the grandchildren and the children would be buried underneath the tree. So it is African tradition to bury the umbilical cord as introduction to the ancestors, to make sure that you are given light and protection. If we would look closer to the house, we see underneath the roof there's a bit of black bricks, and that would be from petrol bombing. So when Nelson Mandela was in prison, Mama Winnie Mandela was in the house. And yes, of course, because all political leaders were in prison, she was the one who was keeping the fire burning on the ground. Hi, Mama. And yes, of course, at some point, the house would be shot at. It got so far that she would even build a wall right behind the window to protect herself. Today, I'm happy to see that the museum is open. A few days back, there was news that the house was liquidated, and we almost lost our museum. And today, another exciting thing that makes me happy is that Mama Winnie's house is being converted into a museum. So very soon, we will be visiting the house, and yes, of course, also doing our tours when we get there. So right now, we can just move to the front, right where the 8115 famous address is. And yes, of course, just after that, we come back to our rides, and we head back to the backpackers. Nivule nini mama? Anamaphosa. Now call this side the Disneylands of Soweto. Now when it's quiet like this, it's not good. So this is where the locals really come and have fun. Mostly Fridays, Saturdays and Sundays. A lot of events take place here. And yes, of course, it gets really, really packed.
Or not when it's so quiet?
They do come through, but I think only on weekends, because during the week it's very, very quiet. That one for booking flights.
Oh, just for flights.
Yeah, take a tour on a helicopter.
Yeah. Go around.
Please do not zoom in close to my face. This is a different route.
Now we must just go down. No up.
I like that plan. Are you also battling? Oh, good. It's not just me. Yeah.
All right. Welcome to the Circle of Unity. In Zulu, we call it Isbaya. This is where we get to say we are one. Sitting together in a circle. We would sit together in a circle and share a beer from a calabash. It is a traditional beer known as umqomboti. Only takes 4 days to brew it. It is made of African brown sorghum, maize, and not forgetting the good hands of a woman. So it is a very gender-strict procedure when it comes to the brewing of beer and our traditional smoothie. So since now it has been taken and brought to large, big industries, it comes with different flavors. But it is also made up of maize, sugar, and the good hands of a woman. With this one, with some banana on top. So right here, it is a Zulu tradition. I, for one, I am Zulu. And yes, of course, we're gonna share the beer together. So the thing is, because of the current situation, we won't be drinking from one calabash as we are supposed to. We were drinking in different calabashes. The beer, it is specially brewed for our ancestors. And is, of course, enjoyed by us. So whenever we're gonna have a birthday party, a funeral, a wedding, we always include our ancestors. As I had mentioned that the beer, it is specially brewed for our ancestors. So the first sip of the beer, it is always for our ancestors. If you like the beer, you say, aha.
Aha. Thank you.
If you don't like the beer, you say, mm-mm. You're gonna have yours later. So we can have a taste on our African beer. Since everyone is holding his or her own, cheers to Soweto. Aha!
Tell them what it tastes like.
It's quite sour. You can actually taste the fermentation of it, but easy to drink.
So with only 2% alcohol volume, it can't do really any harm. But if you really want to get drunk from this, but if you really want to probably get tipsy from it, you must start very early in the morning. And probably around 6 o'clock later in the afternoon, you might be feeling something. But it does get stronger. The longer you keep it, the stronger it gets. Amageu, they only ferment for a day, just to make sure that it doesn't get to a point where it contains alcohol, because it is mostly enjoyed by kids, and yes, of course, by those who are sometimes sick and can't down anything solid. So yes, Amageu, they will definitely keep you going. So traditionally, maize is harvested and crushed in one of these wooden crushers we normally use for our traditional beers. And when it's finely crushed, it is then mixed up with African brown sorghum and then cooked until it forms some sort of porridge. And the next day, water is added on the porridge, and then filtering out the grains, storing the rest of the brewing in buckets, later covering them with a blanket so that they can start to ferment. And then on the 4th day, you come and check your beer if it's okay, or your mageu if it's okay. So with the beer, the only way to see if it is perfectly brewed, you light a matchstick, you place it right on top of the vat. If it stays lit, that means the beer is not ready. But if it gets blown away from fermenting because of the carbon dioxide being produced there, then yes, of course, we say that as Africans, the ancestors have agreed for you to proceed with whatever that you wanted to do. So yes, with Amageu, it's only a day, maize, water, sugar. Mixing up the 3 together, cooking them until they form porridge. When the porridge is ripe, you add water. Adding water, from there, you shake it, you store it in your buckets where it will be served nice and cold. It can also be refrigerated.
Can you guys see the amageu here? Can you see how thick that is inside the cup? It's a very thick drink. You can nearly almost chew it.
Yep.
And it tastes, it's got that sort of distinct maize taste about it. It's quite a bland taste, but it's a very enjoyable taste. And I think especially if you've been used to it growing up in the country as well, you can't actually get enough of it. It's a great taste. But if you come from overseas, you're not used to eating lots of sort of bland maize products. It doesn't really taste of anything. It's more a texture than an actual taste. Thank you so much.
Fruit salad you serve yourself.
Okay.
So another form of a meal that is also made of maize.
Yep.
This will be white corn. Yes, please. Cool. Thanks, man.
Serve yourself. Pickle salad.
So like the drink as well.
Okay.
It's perfect, thank you. Pap it doesn't really have a distinct flavour as such. It's quite bland. It's very stodgy, very thick, and it's delicious. So if you put your sauce on it, or the curried carrots, or archa like we had earlier with the fat cakes, it's delicious. Eh?
Absolutely.
Then afterwards, you head up to my colleague, Mama.
All right. Thank you, bro. Hello, Mama.
Good afternoon.
How are you today?
And how are you?
Very well, thank you.
Did you enjoy the tour?
We absolutely did.
Yes.
It built up a very nice appetite for us.
So,
Do you want to?
I've got some chicken here. I've got some beef stew, beef turkey. I've got some vegetarian. I've got spinach. What would you like to have?
So that's how we spell poiki,
Yes.
and it's pronounced poiki.
Poiki. Because it's an Afrikaans word.
Thank you. Bit of meat.
No, ngizokufakela.
Oh.
Put it back.
Okay.
Samanje ukuthi ngisethe iplate lakho.
No
Ibe
problem.
nama-sauce nani.
Oh, fantastic.
Are you sure?
That looks so good. One of the most important days in South Africa is the Youth Uprising of June 16, 1976. From that day, every June 16 in South Africa today is a national holiday. It is called Youth Day, and it pays respect to each and every young person who came out of school on the day of 1976 to protest for a better education system. If you compare it to today, you can say so many students, because of our high unemployment rate, will always be thinking about the relevant of the current curriculum today in school. Maybe they need to protest against that, because even when they come out of school, a lot of them still become unemployed or unemployable. Now, this event though, it shows such an important part that the kids in South Africa, influenced by their leaders, influenced by the adults who have already been fighting in the struggle against apartheid, they themselves saw something that was directly facing them, and that was an access to a better education system. And from June 13 and even before then, a number of student leaders has started congregating and meeting and trying to see what is it that they can do that can be effective, and that the government can actually hear them when they come out to do it. And the protest march that was planned for June 16 was going to be the one thing that to shut down all of the schools in Soweto, get all of the students to join them, and to take a memorandum to a local education department. And this memorial acre and the memorial site actually tells the story on how the students started meeting from June 13, but the event itself started on June 16. Now, no adults, no teachers were involved in the planning of this. Only young children between the age of 12 and up to about 20 were involved in all of these demonstrations. From as early as 7 in the morning, the police had already found out or heard about something that was planned, but they just did not anticipate that over 10,000 students will get together and embark on this protest march. By 8 in the morning, when the schools were supposed to have, classes were supposed to have started already, just after the morning prayers, the students already boycotted the classes and decided to come out and join their fellow students in the protest. Today there are over 50 high schools in Soweto, but these were just some of the fewer of them that were involved with regards to the planning of the protest. This one in particular, Morris Isaacson High School, is where one of the most prominent young leaders of that time, by the name of Tsietsi Mashinini, he was only 19 years old, and he was the main leader of the students' governing body across Soweto. and that was the school where he came from. But the students had collected each other coming from different schools and all meeting up for just one cause. We spoke earlier about the likes of Hector Pietersen, one of the first victims of the uprising, and these were the schools around the area where the Hector Pietersen Museum and the memorial site is situated today.
So are these schools that are joining into the march?
Yeah, so these students were coming from all across different sections of Soweto, from north, south, from the east to the west. They were coming from different sections of Soweto, and the whole plan was to go right about to Orlando High, where the Department of Education was situated, and that's where the students were planning to take their memorandum of demands. We obviously always have to include the police stations because the police were the ones to first respond, and unfortunately in those days they were never really trained for peaceful crowd control. They were more demanding rather than trying to hear what the students were demonstrating about and what their complaints were.
Okay, 9:15.
Now by 9:15, journalists are always the first ones to react, and Soweto being an area that is always politically active and motivated, the journalists were always around here and they were the ones who first reacted and first came in on site. The coverage of the events was always important because the stories that are always told about how, who and when the events were planned will always be one-sided. So to have such a wider viewpoint from different individuals and different photographers and journalists who were there to cover the story, that was always going to be important to tell the story internationally as well. When we talk about the sign of Black Power, for example, they say that a crowd came to meet some of the journalists. Just put up your fist in the air like this in support of any discrimination and in support of human rights. It was always also going to be difficult for the police officers because these students came from different directions. And at that time, with little training and obviously just only taught to shoot and kill, none of them could ever be sure about who the next dangerous person would have been, even though this was a group of students with almost no weapons whatsoever, but instinctively human beings will always try to protect themselves.
Hector Pietersen is shot at 10:30 in the morning.
Yep. By this time, the whole of the area around where the protest was already a huge riot instead of anything else. A lot has gotten out of control, and the whole point again of the protest was just against the use of Afrikaans as a medium of instructions. A language which a lot of people considered as the language of the oppressor, but more importantly, nobody really in Soweto could speak Afrikaans properly. So how were they going to be educated in language that they couldn't understand, but also importantly, the teachers couldn't translate themselves. It all began because at the beginning of that year of 1976, the Department of Education had converted or translated English textbooks which taught mathematics and science into Afrikaans. And that was mainly the reason that the teachers were going to find it hard to explain maths and science and other important subjects in a language that they themselves could not speak properly. Delivery trucks, delivery vans were obviously always going to be the biggest targets. Liquor stores were always going to be the biggest target, also because a lot of young people felt that a lot of their adults, instead of standing up and fighting for their rights, were rather numbing their pain and suffering with the use of alcohol. So these kind of institutions were always going to be the biggest targets whenever there was an uprising against the state. To make the country ungovernable or the city ungovernable, you have to first target the transport system. And trains and buses are always also on the forefront of it all. There were even a lot of other innocent victims. Here it speaks about Chief Welfare Officer D.M. Edelstein, who was attacked. And one of the main reasons was nothing else but the fact that he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Again, we spoke a bit about the importance of the coverage of the stories. The more people had evidence of the brutality of the police, the more the state couldn't deny or saying that they were not aware of any violent acts that were perpetrated toward the students. So by the evening news, the different broadcasters are talking about the violence in Soweto, and people are covering it in different ways. But also they're saying that Soweto today, the students are protesting because they don't want to go to school, but where in reality they thought it was always be about that they just were protesting for a better education system. So it had nothing to do with them not wanting to go to school, but it had everything to do with the fact that they wanted a better education system and one that would be relevant to their future at that time. A visit to South Africa, a tour of Johannesburg will never be complete without a stop at the Apartheid Museum. While this is one of the very dark side of our past, but it has also shaped us to be the kind of people that we are today as a nation. Unfortunately, so many of the bad things that has happened in South Africa, or we still experience today, have been as a result of this system. The word itself simply means separateness. Apartheid, separateness. Not only were we divided on racial classifications, but we were divided on class, we were divided on cultural backgrounds. For a country very rich with culture and also with pride itself of its existence, we have 11 different languages. That means we have 11 different cultural groups that exist across South Africa. Every one of them is proud of their heritage and of their existence. The sole core of this system was to divide and conquer. Divide all South Africans according to their racial backgrounds, their creed, or their cultural backgrounds. In that way, the state was able to limit the interactions between the different racial backgrounds of South Africa, therefore not giving them an opportunity to think as a collective, but rather to only consider or think of just one particular cultural group or for their own benefit. One of the biggest impact of the system has to be education. The access to education or excellent levels of education, the very limited amount of money that are spent on funding education for the majority of the population, those kind of instances is what we experience today and is still what we feel today has contributed to us taking an even longer period of time to overcome the inequalities created by the past. Most of the history of South Africa has been summarized inside this museum. The Apartheid Museum gives you a full background of where we come from as a nation and on how far we've come on growing and accepting the variety and the different cultures that South Africa embraces today.
So guys, that is pretty much a wrap for our day in Soweto. We hope you've enjoyed this video tremendously, and I just want to jump in here and just say, you know, South Africa has got this unbelievable past that you guys have obviously picked up on now, and both Bongani and I would have grown up in very different cultures and different areas of South Africa. And if you guys have any questions whatsoever, both Bongani and I are very, very comfortable. So even if it's something that you fear might be a bit offensive, please don't worry, that's what we're here for. We're both going to be on the Zoom call with you guys, and we will be more than willing to share with you our experiences and everything that we've grown up with, and what life was like during the later part of those years.
Yeah.
We're looking forward to meeting you all.
Absolutely. We were also very fortunate. Well, sorry. I wanted to. Now, adding to what Vikki has just said, both of us are still very young, so we've had an opportunity to meet some of the people that were involved in part of this history. We are fortunate enough because our history is so young. In that instance, a lot of the people who are participants in these historical backgrounds are still around. So they've shared their stories with us. We've had stories from either side. We've had stories from people who were around 50 years ago when the youth uprising was happening. But we'll be happy to share such information with you. So feel free, ask as many questions as you like to, and we'll be more than happy to answer them for you.